Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mic Check
2.
My name is Rachel.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Aja.
And today we have a lovely guest joining us, and I'll allow her to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sherletta Carter, and I'm a therapist with St. Hope.
So welcome actually back. This is your second time on Mic Check 2.
It is. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, and today we have a really important and sensitive topic that we would like to discuss. We're going to be going over suicide awareness. It's the month of September, so it's just always a great topic to bring awareness and kind of help end some of the stigma around it.
Yes. So September is going to be Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, which provides a dedicated time for people, organizations, and communities to join their voices and share that there is hope, help is available, and healing is possible.
Oh, I like that.
I like that. So we're going to be dispelling some myths, talking about ways people can seek out help, or if you need to talk to a friend, or if you just want a phone number to call, we're going to be bringing all of that up today.
I love that. So one of my first questions, let's just dive into it. Y'all know I had to say that. Let's just dive into it. It is a very sensitive topic, and a lot of our peers, it may be difficult to bring up the topic of suicide awareness. So what kind of pointers and things would you give us to even just start having the conversation with our friends?
You know, I think the first most important one is just being compassionate, right? Just like being there for your friend, listening to your friend, asking them, hey, and being direct too. A lot of times people are not very direct about what they're noticing going on with their friend, or they kind of skirt around it, but just saying like, hey, you seem really sad. Are you okay? Tell me what's going on. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm here for you. And be trustworthy as well. And just be there for them and let them know I'm here for you if you need any help. And based on whatever they say, if they're saying things, and we'll talk about warning signs, if they say things that are kind of on that warning sign list, ask them, hey, are you thinking about ending your life? So definitely compassionate, empathy, and being direct and honest.
And even transparent.
Yes.
You definitely have to be transparent with conversations like this, because you don't know how you're going to react, and you don't want to downplay someone else's feelings.
Exactly.
So,
And that brings a point. That's a big stigma, I should say. Like when people express like, oh, I am feeling like unaliving myself, or these certain emotions are bringing up or reoccurring in my mind. And a lot of times people will downplay what they're feeling, or like, oh, did you eat today? Mm-hmm. Did you take, what did you?
You need to drink.
Yeah.
Or you need
How much water do you have?
Or you need to sleep it off. You'll be okay.
Right. And I really think that's just very unfortunate. So are there any signs besides them verbally saying it, like, oh, I'm feeling this way, that people should look out for?
You know, it can also be if the person is giving things away, if they're making plans all of a sudden, you know, like, oh, I'm going to sell these things, or, oh, I want to downside my assets. And especially if they've been really depressed for a long time and all of a sudden that's happening. And sometimes too, if they've been depressed for a long time and then all of a sudden they're really happy, it's typically when people do end their life. Is when all of a sudden depression is not always an indicator of, you know, somebody thinking about suicide. It can be that all of a sudden they have an upswing, which means they have more energy to actually execute their plan.
That is a good point.
I don't even think about it like that. Mm-hmm.
So, and just withdrawing, you're not hearing from them anymore. You know, all of a sudden they're really isolating themselves. Obviously depression, or an increase in like alcohol, drug abuse, you know, just like really risky behaviors, not seeming like they really care about themselves anymore.
Mm-hmm. Especially since like during COVID, there's been like rising like different stressors financially, difficulty assessing or accessing mental health care. So I'm trying to say it. I don't want to say it the wrong way. Ever since COVID, like, you know, people, like you said, they isolate themselves, and you never really had ways to vent. And so I feel like it's gotten a lot worse, because you still have people in that kind of space where they don't want to be around people. So if you're depressed or you're feeling some kind of way, some people really will stay withdrawn more often now
Exactly.
than prior to
Yeah.
like
Pandemic,
the whole pandemic. Yeah.
The pandemic, like, really, for people who already struggled with mental illness, it really, like, set them back. Then on top of the fact that if you lost your job during COVID, if all of a sudden you went from working full time and your kids being in school, now you're working at home, or you're not working at all, and then your kids are at home. And then, a lot of people's marriages or relationships ended during COVID. So all of these stressors, like, just really sent people over the edge. And it takes years a lot of times for societies to bounce back from that, because that was just a massive hit, right? And we saw an up intake in suicidal, like, hotline phone calls, people trying to end their life. So it definitely, like, really, really impacted people, especially because of the isolation. The isolation is what did it.
And it's funny that you said the isolation, because to me, it was interesting to see how many people were, like, excited to go back to work, because they were just like, when I'm at home, like, this is my space. Like, I don't want home and work to be one, like, I don't know how to separate it. So when they were able to actually go back into the office, they kind of got back into the routine of normalcy. And it just, some people just didn't like work from home.
A lot of people don't. A lot of people, I mean, obviously there's a benefit to it and there's balance, but if you're already feel alone and then you're not interacting with people, or say you just are you're an extrovert, and all of a sudden you go from seeing people all the time to not seeing people for months.
Oh, yeah.
And then on top of the fear on top of that, I mean, just like imagine what that does to you mentally. And it impacted everybody. And a lot of therapists quit being therapists during that time. They just left the field. And you look at the statistic on that, because they were also dealing with their own stuff, their own losses, them losing their own family members, and the stress within our own field of having to have what's called compassion. They started developing compassion fatigue and burnout.
That makes sense, though, because you're still trying to navigate, like, okay, now I can't see you in person. I got to get tech savvy all of a sudden. And unfortunately, family members did pass away during that time, and then trying to deal with that. And then you have somebody else probably triggering you, talking about their family member passing. So that's actually a good point. I want to go back to you talking about how you said if you notice, like, a burst of energy in people. I think that's a really good point with, like, the celebrities recently. It was that one gentleman. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Which one?
The dancer. He was on the Ellen show.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
And everybody just...
Twitch.
Yeah, everybody just talked about... I had no idea. He was just so positive. His energy was always good. And, like, the last video he posted, his wife was just like, this is, like, the most energy he's ever given me in, like, the last week. And he was dancing with the kids and stuff like that. So it's just interesting to think, like, how the mind, I guess, can function.
So, that's a good one to bring up. Yeah.
So as a mental health professional, that would pretty much be a really good misconception, just because you see a burst of energy again.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that they're doing well. It just means that they're feeling good enough to actually plan it out, because you can be so depressed that you don't even have the energy to do something that you've been planning on doing. And it's hard, because she didn't know that he was having suicidal thoughts. Right. It would have to take somebody to say, hey, I noticed a shift. Is everything okay? For somebody to look beneath what appeared to be happiness and joy and say, there seems to be something different going on.
Would that be the most easiest approach? Just coming out right and just saying, hey, is
everything okay? Yeah. How are you feeling? What are you thinking? Because a lot of times we don't know what people struggle with, what people are thinking about, which is like going back to COVID, like people struggle with a lot of negative thoughts. And a lot of, like, they may seem really happy, right? Like Facebook and Instagram, people seem great and happy, but then, like, wait a minute, they just ended their life.
Look what happened.
So
I know you mentioned as well being direct. So what is the difference between being direct and, like, pushy? Because you don't want to be pushy, correct? Okay.
That's a really good question. Even as a therapist, you can't be pushy, because it has to be a safe place for that person, which means that you have to check your own fears or anxiety at the door, right? Like really, like, get in touch with yourself. Like, okay, I'm worried about my friend, or worried about my mother or whoever. I'm really nervous to ask them this, but let me prepare myself, because I want to be there for them and I don't want to push them. So I would say, hey, Sean, like, you seem really sad. Are you okay? And say, if Sean says, well, yeah, I've been thinking about not being alive anymore. Okay. Can you tell me more about that? How can I be there for you? Or that makes me really sad to hear. And I want to be here for you. I'm sad that you're feeling that way. Can we talk about that? Versus saying, why would you feel like that? Well, we need to go do something. Mm-hmm. You can say that at the end, well, how can we help you? Right. Do you need to go talk to somebody? But be present in that moment with that person so they can feel heard. Because a lot of times people just want to feel heard. There was a study done in a video on people that have jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge that have survived. Mm-hmm. And they said that as soon as they jumped off that bridge, they immediately regretted it and I wish somebody would have asked me, was I okay? Mm. There was a guy that took a pit that some tourist came up to the guy and he asked for him, the person that was about to end his life, to take a picture of me. So he took a picture and he said, I wish they would have asked me, was I okay? Yeah. And then he jumped off the bridge. He lived, broke his bones in his body, but he lived and now he's an advocate. But all of them said, I wish somebody would have asked.
It's scary to think it could be that simple sometimes.
Mm-hmm. You know, absent-minded people can be such like tourists.
Yeah.
If you see someone like if I see someone standing on a bridge, you're probably thinking they're trying to take a picture or they're trying to just embrace the moment of the view.
And I think Aja's pretty good at this too. Just checking in first before like asking for something like, hey, hope all is well, or hey, how's it going over there? And then, you know, once she allows you to respond first, and that's important because some people are like, hope all is well. And then you're like, well, it's not all well, you know? And now I still have your task to accomplish too. So I think you do really good at that of just being like, hey.
Thanks. I think it's just because I don't want to ever dump especially emotionally dump something on somebody and then they're in a fragile place also, because now I'm dumping on you and then you already are carrying whatever burden you're carrying. Mm-hmm. So I always just try to make sure I check on people, and it's a genuine check-in. Like I always just want to make sure that everybody's okay, because I know it's difficult sometimes just having conversation, especially amongst friends or family members or an outside person, you can kind of dig a little deeper. Yeah. And saying stuff out loud helps things to become like a reality, or help you to see like, oh, well, Sherletta is feeling like that too. Okay, so I'm not alone. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that's why I really just always try to have those conversations so that, you know, it's like, girl, I feel like that too. Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe we should get together, you know, sit in the sun. Right. Get some air.
I think my problem is I'm always trying to be like, me too. Like, I can relate to that. And then I sometimes have to remember to pause and still allow people to share their stories instead of just being like, girl, let me tell you about me. You're not alone. I just want everybody to feel so included that sometimes I forget to let them include themselves in the conversation. So that's a really good point.
That's a really good point that you make about not, because we as people, when it's like our family and friends, we want them to know like they're not alone. Mm-hmm. So we'll over talk. And a lot of times silence is the best thing. Mm-hmm. It's just, and we do feel, a lot of times we feel uncomfortable with silence, but just sitting there and saying nothing and listening to the person and not saying, well, yeah, I've been there too. Yeah, that happened to me. Because then it can kind of invalidate what they're saying.
It definitely minimizes.
Yeah, it minimizes it in like, well, I've been there too, and it's just simply just listening, right, and just saying nothing. The thing too is that, like you said something about we don't often say anything, and that's a big thing in like our Black and Brown populations. We just won't talk. Like, well, they're going through a lot.
We
so
brought that up before in another previous mental health awareness discussion of how that's a stigma amongst like our families that we don't talk about those kind of things. Yeah. Because then, you know, your auntie or somebody may be like, oh, you crazy. You need to take medicine. Something like that. So.
Or that they don't even want you to take medicine. Yeah. Like,
or they don't want you to take
it'll
medicine.
Pass. I think people think sometimes it's just like a cold. Like, oh, it'll pass. Oh, however you feeling, it'll pass. Oh, those thoughts, it'll pass.
It's some video games. If you stay off them video games, or if you cleaned your room, you wouldn't be. You're like, what?
It's those 5G. It's those 5G waves going to your brain. It'll pass. Right. I'm just like, what?
You better sad yourself to them dishes. You're like, I don't want. What?
So why do we think like there's a large stigma in minority communities in regards to mental health and suicide? What would you think? I mean, for me, I would think that would be a big one, is because our families have conditioned us to be like,
Well,
mental health isn't a thing.
Yeah, it's not a thing. Oh, they're going to think you crazy. It's a sign of weakness. And that's the thing for men as well. Not just Black or brown men. That's, for men in general. But that, they're going to think you're crazy. You're not crazy. And then especially if you tell your mom or your dad that you're going to go to therapy, they immediately internalize it like, well, you're saying that I was a bad parent then. So why are you going to therapy? And then they may downplay it. So there's all of these variables to it. But the biggest one is the mistrust of the healthcare system in general. There's also not a lot of, now Houston is different, but there's not a lot of Black and brown therapists. And so a lot of times they won't come if you're not Black. Unfortunately, a lot of times.
Right.
Or they'll think like, well, maybe you won't be able to relate to me. But there's all this misconception about therapy. There's a lot of fear about mistrust of the system. Fear, if I tell you what's going on, are you going to be able to relate and understand? Fear of, are you going to report me if I tell you what's going on in my household?
I didn't mean to cut you off. And I've actually had situations like that happen at our locations. Like, some people say, I'm feeling like this, but I don't want to tell anyone, because as medical professionals, you may, depending on the severity of the situation.
Yeah.
So how for you, how do you
Navigate?
Yeah, how would you navigate that? Because that's such a gray area. Like, there's a real fine line between like, this is severe, or I have to
report kind of thing.
Yeah, how would...
So myself, and I would say definitely for the other therapists at St. Hope, is you always tell people, and it's also the law, you have to tell each patient at their first session that I'm a mandated reporter, and also there's things that do not fall under confidentiality, right? Like, our sessions are confidential unless you tell me, not that you're just suicidal, but that you have a plan and you're going to act it out. So, and we always tell them that, and we sit down and talk about that. And what does that mean? And so just because if somebody says they're suicidal doesn't mean they need to go to the hospital. A lot of times they don't. It's just, let's come up with a plan. Let's learn how to manage these symptoms. Let's create a safety plan. Let's find people that you feel safe with. I'm available if you need to call me. Not that we're emergency services, but if you need to call me, you can call me. Let's give you hotline numbers. Where can you go? What hospital? So we'll create a whole plan with them. But it's just talking about it and being honest. Honesty is the best thing, because I'm not going to lie and say I'm not going to say anything. I have to, if you have a plan.
That's part of building the trust right there.
It's the building the trust. And that's one of the things. I have sent several patients to the hospital through St. Help, but we've talked it out, and we've come up with a plan together. And it's been not me, overbearing. It's been, we are a team. I may be your therapist and I may be an expert in the field, but I'm not an expert of you. And so let's do this together, because we're a team.
I think it's really good to build the relationship with your client and let them know that this is a safe place. And I like how you mentioned that you actually have had incidents here at St. Hope where you had to, make that call on behalf of the patient. And do you see, when you guys are creating the plan, do you see like their willingness to not really want to do this? They're just kind of looking for just a listening ear? Is that kind of what your experience has been?
It's a lot of times the thoughts have been there for years, or it comes and goes. And so if they're talking about it, they really probably don't want to act it out. But, we also have patients that have and that have actually done things and have been hospitalized. And so those are those patients that we have to really, really be mindful of. And, okay, I have to see you every week, so we can make sure you're okay and safe. And so as long as they're showing up for their sessions and they're making sure, okay, I'm taking my medication, I'm talking about it, I'm putting everything in place, then they're less likely. But if somebody has been hospitalized multiple times, they're more likely to follow through.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I have a question. It's not on here though. I just thought about it. Okay. So let's say we have a loved one that actually attempts, but it doesn't go through. That would make everybody around them a little bit more anxious, or nervous or certain things, how do we navigate that relationship after an attempt?
It's definitely a fine line, because they need the support, and they need somebody to be there, but they don't want to be treated as if they can't be trusted with themselves, and maybe they can't for a while. And so you have that conversation and saying, these are the things we're going to do,
Okay.
to make sure you're okay. We want, and I've had this with patients that, okay, we want to make sure you give us a call. We want to make sure somebody's with you. We respect you and we love you and we know that you're an adult, and we want to make sure you're safe because you are extremely important to us.
Okay.
But without being overbearing.
Because you always want people to feel respected. And that's the biggest thing, is that if they don't feel respected, then it's just like, well, why would I do this? You don't respect me. You don't care. And then it ends up making them more depressed.
Right.
But just respected, compassionate, and loved, and just seen and heard. That is some of the biggest things. People want to feel seen and heard.
That's a really good point. I know earlier you mentioned too about the stigma with males, like they have to be strong, and they're taught like crying is a sign of weakness and all of those things. And it's actually really interesting because male suicide death rates are actually 4 times higher than those of the female race. So why do you think that is? And what are some ways that we could probably help decrease that?
So it's an interesting thing about men and suicide. Women are more likely to attempt than men. Men are they're more, I guess, their follow through is a lot higher because they use lethal means. So they're much more likely to use violent means like weapons, and that. So that's why the rates are higher. And I was looking up like the amount of deaths last year from suicide, which is like one of the leading causes of death in the U.S. And so there was 10,000 women that unalived themselves versus 39,000 men.
So huge difference.
Yeah. And so one of the biggest things, and it sounds like, oh, that's gender norms or stereotypes, but it's true, is women talk way more. And men oftentimes don't. And so it's about trust building. A lot of it's about coming against generational trauma or beliefs about men's ability to talk and communicate. A lot of times men won't talk about their trauma. They won't stay in therapy, especially our Black and brown men. And honestly, white men too. I'm in Conroe a good amount of white male patients, and it's hard to stay in therapy and stay present and stay talking about trauma that you haven't talked about in like 20, 30 years. So it's a lot of
men in general don't even like the word trauma.
Yeah.
Like,
Do you think
you wasn't there?
do you experience in sessions that sometimes whenever you kind of like scratch the surface, they're kind of just like, oh, I'm okay, we talked about it,
I'm good now. Thank you. Thank you, Doc.
It's like, we don't need to follow up on this. I'm good.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, and that could be with women as well, but definitely I would say a lot of times with men, it's just like, it's really hard being present. And then it can also, I have to consider too, how do you feel about working with me as a woman? How does that feel for you? How do you feel about talking about these very deep, hard things that have happened? And a lot of times sometimes would rather work with a woman because maybe there was sexual abuse that they experienced and they don't feel as much shame, but there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of shame. And it may not be that. It may not be as a big violation like that as trauma. It can just be being physically abused, or it could just be simply, I am depressed all the time. Or I have this, relationship issue, and just feeling free enough to say, it's okay for me to say how I feel.
That's a really good point, Aja, because I did therapy for like 6 months and I was like, I'm healed. You did it. You did your big one on that one. I was like, yeah.
And you were just scratching the surface.
And then about 6 months later, I was like, hey.
Do you have availability on next Tuesday?
I checked your site and I'm going to go ahead and book on next Tuesday. And it is difficult coming back into therapy. So I think it's a lot of people think like, oh, they're going to judge me for coming back. No, she was just like, welcome back. And I was like, let me go ahead and dump in this 1 hour what's happened the last 6 months. Are you ready? Get your notepad out. Like,
Yeah. I think my thing and my big approach is we do see a lot more men. specifically at St. Hope. And so for me, it's just always letting them know I'm not judging you. I am just here with you. And I think really understanding that the dynamics of the therapist and patient relationship is if they see you as like, Lord, you're this authority, it makes it hard for people to connect. Specifically, like our Black and brown men, I have to be very mindful of, like, we're equals in this room. Yes, I may have my master's and I have this knowledge, but we're equals.
Right.
And how do we like walk this together and being, you know, just leveraging how, you know, using kindness, just basic human, you know, characteristics, just human emotions, like just be there for the person. A lot of times people just need you to be there for me.
I
And
think,
even, go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I think what I really enjoy about having these conversations, for people who have never sought out speaking to like a mental health professional or things like that, you kind of don't know what to expect. And I feel like whenever we have episodes like this, it kind of gives you a small glimpse so you can know that you're not being judged or what to kind of expect, and that, you know, you actually work too. You make plans. You have somebody sitting there talking with you, and you're not, you know, it's you guys are having a discussion. It's not just somebody that's sitting there talking directly to you, like, or
at you, because you know your parents talk at you.
Yeah,
a lot of
so
people
I think that kind of helps too. Just for people who have never thought about therapy or never thought about counseling or things like that, I think that kind of helps them to know, like, okay, it's not as bad as I've made it play out in my head. Because I think sometimes too, that's like a big misconception about going to the doctor's office. People already have anxiety as soon as they park the car. Blood pressure is through
as they make the appointment, they're like, why did I make that?
Why did I do that?
Yeah.
And I think it kind of just gives a little insight of like what you can kind of expect. Like, obviously, you know, these episodes are not, you know, here to, we're not your Google. And please don't Google. Please actually seek out somebody with the credentials. But I think just hearing the person with the credentials actually tell you, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to go.
This is what you can expect.
Yeah. I think that really helps because, you know, discussing topics or, you know, feelings or things like that, you know, people just, especially in the Black community, people like therapy, a psychiatrist, you on them pills.
Right.
Like, I think it kind of like lets people know that there's different avenues that you can take, and it's not just one person in a padded room with the straitjacket on.
There's one little thing with that too, because I know like a lot of our patients that are newly diagnosed with like HIV, that could be a huge mental like curveball to some people. And I know the one thing I really like is that we just started the HIV awareness group, that for like, especially for people that are newly diagnosed, because you meet people, and I know I meet a lot of people in my second line of work outside of here, but then I see them come in and then they're like, oh my God. And then they find out about like their status, and it like flips them over. So they're like they're a totally different person for the next couple of months. So when you have like those HIV awareness groups, I love them because you have people that are also some are already diagnosed, but some are also newly diagnosed. So it's like y'all are on a level playing field. It's like, I can relate to you. Let me hear your story. And then y'all can kind of navigate, like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And I know we do offer those with you and Mallory
And Josephine. Yeah. Thank you for the plug.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm doing a shameless plug, but it's a real thing. Just because I've talked to a lot of guys that are newly diagnosed, and they really don't they don't have the mental capacity at that moment to be like, where do I go? Because most people, when they're newly diagnosed, they automatically will think, this is it. I have nothing else to live for because I have this issue. In my mind, before they're educated by their medical professional or counselor, they're already thinking where it's like, I'm going to have AIDS, I'm going to unalive, and it's a lot.
Yeah.
So that's why I just wanted to do that little plug just for like patients that are diagnosed with any kind of chronic illness. There are groups out there. So I really appreciate like the HIV awareness group that y'all started, just because that's a really tough thing. And since we deal with a lot of patients that are working through that, it helps.
Mm-hmm. It is a tough thing. And I think the best thing about groups is there may not be necessarily like a suicide group, but it's just a group on like HIV awareness or depression group. And inevitably that's going to come up. And definitely with our patients who are newly diagnosed, and some are even been diagnosed for 20 years, contemplate suicide. Like, my life is over. I have many patients that are like, well, I'll just never date again.
Man.
I'll just be alone for the rest of my life. And
that's
really depressing. It's very depressing to think that I have been given a life sentence and I'm imprisoned in my body. Mm-hmm. And I would say for the group that I ran in Conroe was in person, and it was just all ages. And it was honestly the most beautiful dynamic to witness people support each other. And the group ended 2 months ago. Mm-hmm. We're restarting, but they still all get together on their own.
Oh, that's nice.
And have...
See, now that's why I like groups. I'm going to cut you off just because they may want to exchange numbers, and they may be like, I won't necessarily say a sponsor, but...
a village. You got to have a village.
You have
it's
your
community.
Mm-hmm. So if you're having these thoughts like...
Yeah.
I missed a pill. I'm depressed because I still think it may progress. Let me call my person in my village, and it's okay.
Yeah,
and they can cry it out. They can be depressed or whatever, but then you have that person there to coach you through it if the therapist isn't readily available.
And it's what's wonderful about the group is when people missed or they saw somebody was struggling with depression, they would call. You know, there was people that moved into housing. Mm-hmm. They bought like items for that person's house. It was just amazing to witness.
Oh, that's really touching. It
was amazing. So the thing about one of the preventative things, suicide is 100% preventative. Doesn't mean that you can stop everybody, but there's things that we can do. And one of those is creating community for people. And we saw that with like COVID and other things, that people need other people, period. Yeah. Even if you're an introvert, you still need some doses of human interaction. We all need to feel seen.
In whatever way that looks like.
And in whatever way, in a healthy way. But we need to feel seen.
So what would you say to somebody who's struggling with these thoughts and kind of debating about coming in to see a therapist or not? What advice would you give them?
I would just normalize maybe any fears they may have, any things. I would ask them like, what do you think about therapy? What has your family said about therapy? Mm-hmm. Oh, what they said is, you're crazy. You don't need it. And I was like, well, they may feel that way, but did you know that therapists even go to therapy? Mm-hmm. It's just a place just to talk. You can, and what I do is when I call patients, when we do calls for referrals, I'll call them. They're like, well, why are you calling me? And I'm like, well, you were referred for therapy. How do you feel about that? Well, I don't know. I was like, well, we can just meet and talk. Mm-hmm. It's not, I'm saying that you are this and this and that. I'm just saying like, hey, we can just talk. It doesn't have to be, you need this therapy for these big reasons. It could just be simple like, well, I need help on motivation. I want to start a business and I want to process why I'm having a hard time. We can just talk about that. Mm-hmm. It could be whatever you want it to be.
Right. The focus.
But it's just a neutral person to talk to. That's not going to share your business.
We love the unbiased opinion because your friends are going to be like, it's not you. It's you.
I'm definitely I love you, but it's you. Oh, you're in your own way. Mm. And sometimes you just have to realize sometimes we are in our own way. I say it very loving and kind.
Oh, for sure.
From a space of just transparency. I in all my relationships, I really love when people are very honest with me. I don't do brutal honesty. You could keep that away from me. But just coming from a loving place and it's just honest. Because sometimes I am in my own way. Mm-hmm. And so I do have a question about if somebody is having thoughts or thinking, I don't know, is there a gauge for if a listener out there is like, oh, I've had things cross my mind? Is it, if it crossed your mind once, you should take that leap and, try to find a therapist? Or is it 2 times? How do y'all gauge that?
Really, that is a good question, because really I would say that everybody in their life, at least once, has thought about suicide. They may have crossed, that thought may have crossed, and it left.
Right.
But now if you're noticing going on months or even weeks or days that this is on your mind, call.
Okay.
And you don't have to stay in therapy forever. If you're able to get to a place where you feel at peace, you're not having those thoughts, things are getting back to a place where you want it to be, then you can stop therapy. You judge that, right? Because therapists can say, well, you have to stay unless you're in the hospital, but just call and speak to somebody. Even if you're not having suicidal thoughts,
right,
and you're just wrestling with things in life, you can call.
Now, when you say call, I know they have like the crisis intervention hotline. Are you familiar with how that actually, how does that work?
So there are several ways. You can call or you can text.
Okay.
There's a text hotline number as well, and they have one for teens as well. And some with teens, the teens actually man them as well. But for adults, you call in or you text, and they'll call and they'll assess and see if, where you're at. They'll see if you actually have a plan, and then they may send emergency out to come pick you up. They may do a wellness check with the police, or they'll, if not, they'll refer you out. They'll give you different referrals to different places you can go for therapy.
And kind of listen to you before. Oh, okay. That makes sense.
So, I know we do offer services to, the rural community, but for people who are extremely rural, they're not close to one of our rural places. Do you have any ways that we can kind of just increase the quality of care that people far away or in those extremely rural areas might get? Do you do telehealth?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say probably since COVID, maybe 60-70% of our clients are virtual.
Okay.
And so, because I'm in Conroe, a lot of my patients are rural, like in Huntsville,
that's
Willis.
what I meant.
And so I do see them virtually.
Okay.
Now, sometimes the internet can be spotty in those areas, so I'll give them multiple platforms that we can meet on.
Okay. Nice.
And if maybe the virtual keeps dropping, I'll call them on the phone and we'll talk on the phone. So just to make sure that they're being seen.
Okay. I know, because it just, sometimes people feel like because they're not in the big, you're not in the Houstons or the big metropolitan cities, you kind of feel forgot about, or, the houses aren't on top of each other.
Yeah.
So your neighbor may be a couple of miles away. Yeah. So I know that could be kind of difficult if you're also, far away from family, or people aren't, just a walk away or a drive away, or, if you don't have a car, simple things like that, as far as getting interaction could be difficult. So I was just wondering if, we had ways where we can speak to our rural friends.
Yeah, definitely virtual sessions, phone calls, because a lot of my patients are in the rural community. And, the suicide rate is higher in rural communities because of the more isolation. You're not near people. People don't, you may not see people for a while. And then you're also more likely to have weapons.
Yes.
Yeah,
I saw that firearms were high
in that area. Yeah.
Yeah. I think St. Hope, now one of my patients said that we provide, the patient lives in Montgomery County, said, oh, St. Hope provides transportation now to us. And I'm like, oh,
wow.
Yeah. So that's a great thing, that they can get transportation to our clinic if they want to come in.
Right. We do offer transportation.
Well, yeah, that's a very good point. Transportation, yeah.
They're looking at the human interaction.
Yes. Yes.
So you guys both mentioned hotlines and numbers. Do y'all have any ones that y'all would like to share?
Oh, yes. Hold on. I have it. I did my little research. It's my time to shine, guys. Okay, so of course there is the 988 Suicide and Crisis Hotline. But if you're specifically in Houston, there's the Crisis Intervention Hotline in Houston. And the number is 832-416-1177. And then for teens, you would call 832-416-1199. And you can also text 281-201-4430.
Woohoo.
We'll put this on the screen too.
Oh,
Hopefully.
yeah.
I also wanted to, before we close it out, just one question about coping. If you have had like a loved one who did decide to take the route of unaliving their self. So what would be some coping mechanisms for that?
I mean, definitely therapy, but there's also group support because there are specific groups for those who have experienced that. Grief support groups. There are grief support groups, but there are grief support groups also specific to those who have experienced the death of a family member where they've unalived themselves, because that's a different type of loss. It's loss, but it's a little bit different.
Because I would imagine you take on a lot of blame.
Did I miss something? Is there something that I did not see? And sometimes people say, well, maybe, this was a warning sign. So there's a lot of guilt that can be involved, especially depending on how close you are to that loved one. A lot of guilt, maybe a lot of anger. So definitely support groups, self-care, therapy, talking to trusted people.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's hard not to take things personal, even when,
Even if it's indirect.
Because, mental health is things that we really can't control. I mean, we can help manage it with therapy and things of that nature. But, the person has to really take those steps. And it can be hard to take those steps. So it's always really, really important to remember that you're not at blame. It's easier said than done, of course. So.
Yeah. I mean, I want to consider too that there are times where the person unalived themselves after an argument, and that person was involved in the argument, and they're like, well, I was to blame because I told them this and that. And so, we're here to walk them through that process, that there's no judgment, and we'll just sit with them and walk through that. And that happens.
Yeah.
So, Sherletta.
Go ahead.
Okay. Sherletta, it's always good to have you.
Always.
Always good to just, the voice, it's just so
I know. I'm like,
soothing.
I know. In my head, I'm like, I know her schedule's full. I know it's full. Her voice is just so calming. And I'm like,
it's the motherly voice.
Yeah. And it's just like,
it's that warm motherly
yeah,
voice.
it's like, you're safe here. And I just want to call you and cry on my way home and just let you have
Speak
it.
about everything that's in my head. Like, do you have time?
Did you know? Yeah, did you know? Raja explained, did you know?
I know. So the theme for World Suicide Prevention for the last 2 years has been creating hope through action. Do you have anything that you would like to close out with, or anything that you would like to just share that you feel like our listeners may need?
Ask for help. It's okay to ask for help. You are actually showing strength when you say I need help. If you see a loved one struggling, let them know that I'm here and give them the resources that we just mentioned. And I think definitely like you said, the hope through action is, getting the word out. Even if, as a community, putting out flyers, letting people know, like, it's okay. Like, I've struggled too. There is help out there. It's okay that you're struggling. It's okay to go ask for help.
I love that.
And then if you are curious about wanting to set up a session with Sherletta, Mallory, or Josephine, you can always visit our website at offeringhope.org, or you can set up an appointment at 713-778-1300.
Yes.
And don't forget to use the chat feature also.
Don't forget to use the chat feature also. It is readily available if you can't get anyone by phone.
And at St. Hope, you're more than just a number.